was on a quiet day that the first warning came. Galactic traffic was low, communication channels humming with mundane trade reports and diplomatic chatter. A few distant colonies sent out updates, but nothing unusual stirred the daily routine of the unified Galactic Council. The galaxy, in its multitudes of species and civilizations, was vast and serene, at least on the surface. Then came the signal. It was a subspace anomaly, so faint at first that it could have been dismissed as a glitch in the communications grid. However, a handful of seasoned sensors on the outskirts of known space registered it, an electromagnetic distortion that defied explanation. It wasn't natural. At first, scientists theorized it might be a dying star, a rogue planet, or even a massive black hole distorting space itself. But when more anomalies cropped up, one after another, a whole constellation of them, galactic scientists knew something was wrong. This was no accident. This was something alive. In the days that followed, entire systems began to go silent. First, it was just one or two outposts on the edge of the rim, sparsely populated places no one would have missed. Then it was planets, with entire colonies simply vanishing overnight. The lights went out, and no distress calls followed. When the Council sent ships to investigate, they arrived to find nothing. No debris, no wreckage, only dead space where thriving worlds had once been. The Council held an emergency session. Alien representatives from across the galaxy, from the towering, humanoid Vornath to the cold, calculating Keshri, gathered in tense deliberation. The elders, the most ancient and wise of the galaxy's leaders, stared into the unknown with suspicion and fear. "It is the Black Armada," Elder Kairos, the Vornath Supreme Commander, said, his voice grating like metal on metal. The room fell silent, and for the first time in centuries, even the most seasoned members of the Council seemed to shift uneasily. The Black Armada. Human diplomat Kate Mitchell had never heard of them. She leaned forward, speaking into the virtual interface, her face projected onto the screen in front of the entire assembly. She was no military strategist, but in her line of work, she'd seen her fair share of galactic rumors. "What's that? A warlord faction? A pirate fleet?" "No," Kairos replied, his three dark eyes narrowing. "They are something older than that. A force of destruction that arose eons ago. The legends say they are not just a fleet. They are a whole empire, one that was believed to have vanished after the Great Exodus. But now they've returned, and we're unprepared. We were warned once, but we ignored it." Mitchell frowned, feeling the weight of his words. "And you're sure?" Kairos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he nodded toward a holographic projection of a vast fleet, a massive armada of jagged black warships that looked like nothing in the galaxy's databases. "This is their mark. The Black Armada has come back, and they have come for us." The human diplomat's thoughts raced. Her mind wasn't trained for war, but as she listened to the discussions, she could see it. The Council had always been divided. Too many species too eager to protect their own interests, too few willing to unite for the common good. The Black Armada's return would be more than just an invasion. It would be a galaxy-wide reckoning. But then, a new message came through. Faint, barely audible over the growing noise in the Council chambers, a human transmission. "Humanity's fleet is en route. We're sending everything we can. Prepare yourselves," came the voice of General Jack Thornton, an officer from Earth. The word hung in the air, still, stark. The galaxy's most overlooked species, the one that had been ignored, underestimated, was now all that stood between them and annihilation. The Council hesitated, unsure, but in that moment, they knew the truth. Humanity had just joined the fight, and the Black Armada would soon stir. The Black Armada's presence was undeniable. The galaxy, once filled with the hum of trade and peace, was now a tense and chaotic void. The faint, distant stars of the outer rim systems had been blotted out by the dark ships of the Armada, and each new wave of attacks sent shockwaves through the Council. Destruction came faster than any of them had imagined, each world falling to the Black Armada like the slow, deliberate crushing of a bug. There was no warning, no negotiation, only the brutal, unrelenting force of their warships. In the council's chambers, the representatives argued amongst themselves. Every species too afraid to commit their fleets to battle, hesitant to risk everything. The Keshri, a race of cold, logical beings, suggested an immediate withdrawal to the core worlds, abandoning the outer rim as a lost cause. The Vornath, powerful but few in number, were hesitant to throw themselves into a war they might not survive. Only a few alien races, smaller, less influential, muttered about resistance, but their voices were drowned out by fear. The council was paralyzed. That was when General Jack Thornton's voice cut through the council's debate like a razor. "You're waiting for a miracle," he said, his image flashing onto the holographic screen. His face was grim, framed by the backdrop of a human warship, one that looked more like a relic from a forgotten era than a match for the Black Armada. "I'm telling you now, this isn't a war you can talk your way out of. If you don't stand and fight, there won't be anything left to negotiate." Thornton wasn't just any human. He had been to the front lines of more conflicts than most species had ever seen, each battle a testament to humanity's willingness to fight against impossible odds. His reputation as an officer was built on pushing limits, ignoring protocol, and finding ways to win when others saw nothing but defeat. His fleet, though smaller than most, was a patchwork of human warships, old, battle-worn, and outclassed by every other fleet in the galaxy. But Thornton didn't care about that. He cared about one thing: winning. "We're sending everything we've got," he continued, his voice cold but unwavering. "The Black Armada won't even know what hit them." The council watched in stunned silence. It wasn't just that Thornton was defying the political norms of the Galactic Order. It was that, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, someone was offering action instead of diplomacy. And while the council squabbled, the Black Armada continued its unstoppable march, taking system after system without mercy. Humanity's first wave arrived in the Zeta 9 sector, where a small but strategically important colony had been wiped out just days before. Thornton's fleet, comprising a mix of older Earth warships, battlecruisers, destroyers, and the infamous Rust Belt fleet, moved into formation. The ships weren't sleek, weren't advanced, and certainly weren't the match of the Black Armada's advanced weaponry. But Thornton wasn't about to give up without a fight. As the fleet dropped out of warp, a crackling static filled the comms. There, in the center of the sector, the Black Armada appeared, a monstrous fleet of obsidian warships, each one a tower of looming death. The Armada had no fear, no hesitation. It was just another conquest for them, another step in their eternal campaign of annihilation. To them, humanity was nothing but a blip on the radar, a species too primitive to stand against them. But that was exactly what they didn't understand. Humanity didn't fight like the other species in the galaxy. They didn't wait for permission, didn't rely on the strength of their ships alone. They fought dirty, they fought with emotion, with heart, and with the kind of raw determination that no other species had. Thornton's orders were simple: engage them at all costs. No retreat. The first strike was chaos. The human ships fired first, wild, unpredictable shots aimed at the Black Armada's flanks. Their lasers weren't as refined, their missiles weren't as powerful, but they were enough to get the invaders' attention. Thornton's fleet danced through the Armada's fire, ducking in and out of enemy lines with erratic movements, just fast enough to stay one step ahead. And that was when the Armada's commanders made their first mistake. They underestimated the ferocity of humanity. The first battle was a blur. Explosions, screaming alarms, and the violent clatter of metal on metal as the Black Armada returned fire. The human fleet didn't stand a chance in a head-to-head fight. But Thornton didn't intend for it to be a fair fight. Human tactics, unconventional and brutal, turned the battlefield into a maze of ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, and unrelenting pressure. For every hit the Armada landed, The humans struck back twice as hard, fighting with everything they had. They fought like animals cornered, with nothing to lose. And as the battle unfolded, something extraordinary happened. The Black Armada faltered. It wasn't much, just a slight hesitation. A moment of confusion as the invaders realized that these humans weren't going to just lie down and die. The fight raged for hours, and when the dust finally settled, the Black Armada had retreated. For the first time in centuries, they had been forced to pull back. And the galaxy? The galaxy stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. When humanity joined the fight, the Black Armada stirred. Diving deeper, the victory was fleeting, but it was enough to spark something in the galaxy, a flicker of hope where there had been none. Humanity, it seemed, had done the impossible. They had struck the Black Armada, and the Armada had retreated. For the first time since the Black Armada's return, a small but undeniable crack appeared in their seemingly invincible exterior. But that victory came with a heavy price. Thornton's fleet, though victorious, had been ravaged. The human ships, outdated and poorly equipped compared to the advanced warships of the Black Armada, were damaged beyond repair. The crew, though resolute, had lost many good men and women. Yet even in the aftermath, a strange silence settled over the galactic community. The unified Galactic Council had been watching the battle unfold through encrypted broadcasts, their representatives staring at the same unsettling images on their holographic screens. A handful of the smaller species, those without powerful fleets of their own, had seen something promising in humanity's tactics. The human fleet may have been small, but their tenacity was undeniable. However, the major powers, the Vornath, the Keshri, and the Rethai, remained skeptical. They were lucky, said Commander Takar, leader of the Rethai delegation, a reptilian species known for its cold, logical analysis. This was an aberration, a fluke. The Black Armada is far too powerful for them to engage directly. This battle changes nothing. We cannot ignore the fact that humanity survived, argued Ambassador Lyra, a soft-spoken Keshri diplomat. They may not have the firepower to win, but they certainly have the will, and that is something the Armada cannot anticipate. Still, there was hesitation, fear. The Vornath, long known as the Warriors of the Galaxy, were the only species to voice an unequivocal opinion. "They are fools," Elder Kairos declared, his deep voice echoing through the holographic chamber. "The Armada is an ancient enemy. Its power is beyond comprehension. These humans will be wiped out. The galaxy is already lost. We must prepare for the inevitable." But even as the council debated, the Black Armada regrouped. Thornton's unexpected victory had only delayed the inevitable. The Armada was not a force that could be deterred by a few stray shots and an unorthodox approach to battle. They would return, stronger, faster, and more deadly than before. Captain Jack Thornton knew this all too well. He spent sleepless nights strategizing, knowing that the time to wait was over. He had seen the cracks in the Black Armada's armor, but that was only the first step. The second step was bringing the fight to them. And this time, humanity would not be alone. "Is it enough?" he asked his closest officers aboard the command ship Resolute, his voice tight with resolve. "Can we hold them off long enough for the others to join us?" Lieutenant Alice Miller, his tactical officer, paused before answering. "We can't fight them alone, sir. We knew that going in. We'll need the council to commit everything they've got." Thornton clenched his jaw. He already knew the answer, but it didn't stop him from hoping. Humanity had always fought alone. It was in their blood. But now, with the Black Armada pressing forward, that lone wolf mentality wasn't enough. If the galaxy didn't unite behind them, they would all fall. He glanced at the holomap of the war zone, bright points of human-controlled space surrounded by an ocean of dark, encroaching voids. The Black Armada was coming, and this time, they would strike with overwhelming force. Thornton's fleet would be caught in the middle, a small but defiant thorn in a giant's side. "We'll make it work," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Whatever it takes, we fight. If we die trying, so be it. But we make sure the galaxy knows one thing: we didn't go down without a fight." And so, as the Black Armada prepared for its next assault, Thornton knew what he had to do. He needed to convince the Council to act, force their hand, if necessary. His fleet might not be enough to stop the coming storm, but it would give the galaxy time. Time for the other species to finally face the truth. The Black Armada was here, and the only way to defeat them was to unite. It was a hard sell, though. The Council's reluctance still rang in his ears. Fear had a tight grip on the galaxy. Fear of loss. Fear of the unknown, fear of the Black Armada. But what if humanity had something none of the other species did? The sheer, unyielding will to fight. The lull after the first battle didn't last long. Less than a week after Thornton's fleet had repelled the Black Armada's initial assault, the silence that followed was shattered. The reports came in from the outer rim systems. Entire colonies that had once thought themselves safe, worlds with planetary shields, advanced military installations, had fallen. Without warning, without mercy. The Black Armada was here in full force now. Thornton watched as the first waves of the Armada arrived at the outskirts of the Zeta 9 sector, once a thriving hub for interstellar trade. His fleet, battered but unbroken, was still licking its wounds after the previous engagement. The human ships were patched up, barely holding together after the firestorm they had been through. But they had fought with everything they had. They had made their mark, drawn blood. But now it seemed it wasn't enough. "This is just the beginning," Lieutenant Miller muttered, staring at the holo display. The Black Armada's colossal warships, sleek and menacing, blotted out the stars. There were more of them this time. Hundreds of ships. Massive vessels that could wipe out entire fleets in a single sweep. And they weren't wasting any time. "General, the Armada has begun their assault on the Icarus colony," Miller continued, her voice tight with urgency. "It's the first major colony in their path. If they fall, we won't have time to regroup. They'll sweep through the entire sector." Thornton stood in front of the holomap, his jaw clenched. He knew what this meant. The fight wasn't just about holding ground anymore. The Black Armada wasn't merely a threat. They were a force of nature. And they were intent on exterminating everything in their path. He needed reinforcements, more ships, more firepower. The fleet he had now, while brave, was no match for the size and might of the Black Armada. "Can we stall them?" Thornton asked, his voice steady, but laced with the tension of knowing the answer. Miller hesitated, fingers flying over her console as she calculated the odds. "We can delay them for a while. We have some new drones we've been testing, small, agile, and more advanced than our last models. They might be able to slow down the Armada's advance long enough for us to get a message to the Council." Thornton's eyes flicked to the comms officer, who had been monitoring incoming transmissions. "Has anyone in the Council responded?" The officer shook her head. "No word yet, sir. There's been no indication that they're willing to commit fully. Some are still too hesitant." Thornton's heart sank. He had known this would happen. The Council's hesitation was their greatest weakness. They wouldn't see the threat until it was already at their doorstep. By the time they rallied together, it could be too late. "Get our drones out there," Thornton ordered, his voice low and commanding. "We're not waiting for their approval. Send a direct message to every ship we can reach. This is no longer about diplomacy. If they don't fight with us, they will fall with us." The next few hours were a blur. The human fleet, battered and bruised, moved into position around the Icarus colony, setting up a defensive perimeter to slow the Black Armada's inevitable advance. Thornton's heart raced as his ships scattered into the shadows of the colony's moons, ready to strike from multiple angles, hoping to confuse the enemy. As the first wave of the Black Armada ships entered firing range, Thornton's fleet struck. The battle was brutal. The human ships, though smaller, used their agility to their advantage, darting in and out of the Armada's line of fire, firing lasers and missiles with pinpoint precision. They hit hard, but they were outgunned. For every strike they landed, the Black Armada retaliated with devastating force. Explosions rang out in every direction. Thornton's flagship, the Resolute, shook as it absorbed heavy damage. The crew fought through the chaos, staying focused, staying in the fight. But Thornton knew the truth. They couldn't win this battle alone. As the black warships of the Armada pushed deeper into the colony's atmosphere, the human fleet began to retreat, pulling back in a well-coordinated maneuver, but not before leaving their mark. "They'll remember us," Thornton muttered, watching as the last of the drones launched in a final desperate strike. They were small, agile, and meant to be expendable, sacrificial weapons to buy time, to confuse the enemy. But even as they tore through the Armada's formations, they knew it wouldn't be enough. The enemy was too powerful. Still, as the retreat began and the human fleet pulled back to their secondary position, Thornton's resolve hardened. They had delayed the Black Armada, but the battle was far from over. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Council, a few representatives began to wonder, perhaps it was time to stop debating and start fighting. The retreat from the Icarus colony was nothing short of harrowing. Thornton's fleet, battered and bruised, limped back to the outskirts of the sector, their ships taking fire from the Black Armada until the last possible moment. Yet even in the wake of their retreat, humanity had done what they'd always done best. They had made their presence known. The news spread quickly. Holoscreens across the galaxy flickered to life with reports of humanity's defiance. Images of the Resolute and its fleet engaging the Black Armada, tiny ships striking back against the giant invaders, a force that no one had dared challenge before. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the galaxy. In the days that followed, the first signs of a response came. Though it wasn't what Thornton had hoped for, the unified Galactic Council remained fractured, with many of the most powerful species still unwilling to fully commit. The Keshri, ever the pragmatists, voiced their doubts. "We've seen what humanity can do, but this is beyond their ability to handle alone," Ambassador Lyra said in one of the emergency sessions. "They're brave, but they're outmatched. We must consider our own resources carefully." The Vornath, ever proud and fierce, were equally unyielding. "We fight on our terms, or we do not fight at all. These humans are too reckless, too impulsive. The Armada is a foe that requires patience and strategy." But then, the unexpected happened. A message came through from the Rethai, the logical and calculating species that had so far remained distant from the conflict. Captain Tkar, the Rethai military commander, was known for his cold efficiency, and his message was short, too short to be ignored. "We are committing our fleet to the war. We will join the humans," it said simply. The council chambers fell into stunned silence. The Rethai had never been quick to make decisions, and for them to throw their lot in with humanity was a bold move, one that suggested something had changed. "They're right," said Kairos, the Vornath elder, voice deep and rumbling. "We cannot afford to stand on the sidelines. The Black Armada moves with purpose. If we do not unite, we will all fall. Our fleets will join theirs." The council, despite its hesitation, finally began to move. Small, hesitant steps, but steps nonetheless. The Keshri, though cautious, began to mobilize their own warships, agreeing to send aid. The Vornath, with their towering ancient ships, joined the fray, their pride and honor fueling their decision. Even the smaller, more vulnerable species began to send support, smaller fleets, civilian ships retrofitted for battle, all answering the call to action. And then, the message from Earth came again. Thornton's voice, as steady as ever, rang out through the Council's communications. "Prepare yourselves," he said simply. "We're about to show the Armada what happens when the galaxy decides to stand together." The Black Armada's next attack came less than a day later, this time targeting the human stronghold in the Sol sector. But they weren't alone this time. The Rethai fleet was the first to engage, their sleek ships cutting through the darkness with the cold precision of a well-oiled machine. Vornath warships, colossal and imposing, followed in their wake, releasing salvo after salvo of missiles that struck deep into the heart of the Armada's formations. The Keshri, their powerful shields crackling, held the line with deadly efficiency, their sharp-edged technology locking into place to protect the weaker human vessels. Thornton's fleet, battered but emboldened by the arrival of their allies, joined the fray with renewed vigor. The human ships, their cannons firing faster than ever, weaved in and out of the battlefield, striking the Black Armada at every opportunity. It wasn't the largest fleet in the galaxy, but it was one of the most determined. The battle raged for hours, explosions lighting up the blackness of space like distant stars. The combined force of the Council's ships pushed back the Armada, their lines holding for the first time since the invasion began. Humanity, alongside the galaxy's greatest military forces, had taken their stand. And in the midst of the chaos, one undeniable truth began to sink in. The Black Armada was not invincible. But they weren't finished yet. As the combined fleets of the galaxy fought fiercely, the Black Armada seemed to pull back, almost as if testing their resolve. A temporary retreat, perhaps, more like a calculated pause, a brief moment of respite for the invaders. Thornton knew better than to assume victory. The Armada would regroup, and when they did, they would come back stronger. But this was a turning point. The galaxy was no longer passive, no longer divided. For the first time, they had united against a common enemy. And that enemy had learned a harsh lesson. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Thornton stood on the bridge of the Resolute, eyes fixed on the battle unfolding before him. The human fleet was still standing, still fighting. But the war was far from over. The temporary victory over the Black Armada's first wave was exhilarating, but it was also fragile. The galactic fleets, human, Vornath, Keshri, and Rethai, held the line in the Sol sector, pushing the invaders back for the first time. But everyone knew it wouldn't last. The Black Armada was relentless, and its commanders were as calculating as they were merciless. A few days later, the enemy returned, and this time, they came with a fury that would make even the bravest shudder. Humanity, for all its grit and courage, was still outgunned. The Rethai's strategic brilliance and the Vornath's overwhelming firepower couldn't mask the fact that the human fleet was under-equipped compared to the threat they faced. Thornton knew they were playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, and the entire alliance could collapse. The Resolute trembled as another barrage of missiles slammed into its hull. Thornton gritted his teeth and ordered evasive maneuvers, but the human fleet was spread too thin. The combined forces of the Council's fleets had bought them time. But now, time was running out. They changed tactics, Lieutenant Miller reported, her voice tight as she scanned the enemy formations. The Armada is focusing their heavy fire on our weaker ships. It's a decoy. They're trying to break our resolve. Thornton's eyes narrowed as he studied the holomap. The Black Armada's ships were arrayed in a staggered formation, each ship heavily shielded and armed to the teeth. The enemy was systematically isolating the human fleet from their allies, using the chaos to target their vulnerable spots. The Vornath and Keshri ships were engaged in brutal skirmishes on the outskirts, but humanity's line was beginning to crack under pressure. "We can't hold them off much longer," Miller added, voice grim. "We need reinforcements. We need more firepower." Thornton's mind raced. He had sent desperate messages to the Council, urging them to send more support, but the response was slow. The political division was still present, fear and reluctance clouding any true commitment to the fight. Despite their initial show of unity, the members of the Council had begun to question whether they were truly willing to risk everything to fight an enemy that had already destroyed so much. "We don't have much time," Thornton muttered, scanning the incoming threat. The Black Armada was closing in, its massive ships like a dark ocean around the human fleet, suffocating their every move. "Get me through to the Council. Now." The holoscreen flickered to life, And Ambassador Lyra's face appeared. Her expression was weary, the strain of endless diplomatic sessions written across her features. "General Thornton," she said, her tone hesitant, "we've heard your calls, but we're fighting for the future of every living thing in the galaxy, Ambassador," Thornton interrupted, his voice cold and unwavering. "You don't have the luxury of debate anymore. You want to win. Then stop sitting on the sidelines. You have to send reinforcements now, or I'll make sure everyone knows who hesitated when the galaxy needed them." Lyra stiffened, but Thornton could see the shift in her eyes. He had spoken the truth. If they didn't commit now, they would all be swept away in the tide of destruction. The Black Armada was relentless, and they would not stop until every planet was shattered. "General," Lyra finally said, voice steady despite the weight of her words, "I'll make sure the fleets are mobilized. The Council is divided, but I will push them. It's now or never." Thornton didn't wait for her to finish. "We don't have the luxury of never. We have until the end of this battle. Get them to move now." As the comms cut off, Thornton turned to Miller. "We hold. We don't give an inch. We buy the Council every minute they need." The next few hours were chaos. The Black Armada, sensing victory, pressed their attack with everything they had. The human fleet, now isolated, was caught between the oncoming wave of invaders and the unyielding weight of galactic indecision. Thornton's crew fought like lions, but the truth of their situation was undeniable. Without reinforcements, they would be overwhelmed. And just when it seemed like the Black Armada was about to deliver the killing blow, a new signal appeared on the horizon. Ships, scores of ships, jumped into the sector, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a massive cluster. The Vornath's massive warships, the Rethay's sleek precision craft, and, to their surprise, the first wave of Keshri reinforcements arrived just in time. The tide of the battle shifted. The enemy's focus wavered, and Thornton saw the opening they'd been waiting for. "We've got them now," Miller yelled, her voice filled with unrestrained relief. But Thornton wasn't convinced. The Black Armada had a terrifying ability to adapt, and this battle was far from over. The reinforcements would help, but humanity's resolve would be tested to the breaking point. There was no guarantee that the alliance would hold, and if it fractured, the galaxy would fall. The Black Armada wasn't just a fleet. It was a war machine that had been in motion for centuries. And now, it was about to face something it had never truly encountered. A unified galaxy and the sheer will of humanity to fight, no matter the cost. The newly arrived reinforcements were enough to turn the tide, just barely. The Black Armada's focus wavered as the newly rallied fleets of the galaxy poured into the Sol sector, overwhelming the invaders with sheer numbers. But Thornton knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy adapted to the new threat. The Armada had done it before, and it would do it again. This was no ordinary enemy. It was a force of nature, driven by something far colder and more calculated than mere conquest. "Keep them off balance," Thornton ordered, his voice a growl. His fists clenched around the armrests of his command chair as the Resolute shook from another hit. "We can't let them regroup. Not for a second." Lieutenant Miller nodded, her eyes scanning the chaos unfolding on the holoscreens. The Vornath's massive warships were unleashing waves of fire that pushed the Black Armada's ships back, while the Rethai's tactical precision struck deep into the enemy's heart. The Keshri fleet, though smaller, formed an impenetrable defense around humanity's ships, their shields crackling with energy as they absorbed the brunt of enemy fire. Humanity's ships, agile and unpredictable, darted in and out of the fray, picking off stragglers and cutting through the Armada's lines with a ruthlessness that surprised even the hardened generals of the galaxy. But the true battle was being fought not in space. It was being fought in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's people. Would they stand firm, or would fear take hold once again? The alliance was fragile, each member species still uncertain whether they truly had the resolve to defeat a foe like the Black Armada. The Black Armada's next move confirmed their suspicions. A massive capital ship, twice the size of any other in their fleet, slid into the heart of the conflict. This ship was different. Its surface seemed to shimmer and warp, as though its very hull was alive. The Black Leviathan, as it had come to be called, was a living nightmare, a ship designed not just for destruction, but for annihilation. "We need to take that thing out," Miller said, her voice taut with urgency. "That ship's gonna turn the tide. It's like the nerve center of the entire fleet." Thornton's gaze locked onto the Black Leviathan, its dark surface reflecting the chaos around it like a shadow in the void. He didn't hesitate. "Get me a firing solution. We take it down, or we die trying." The human fleet, bolstered by their allies, dove into the fray once again. The Vornath's colossal battleships rained down fire, but the Black Leviathan's shields were impenetrable, rippling with energy that seemed to absorb the fire like a sponge. The human fleet's light-speed missiles had little effect. The Leviathan was a monster, far beyond anything they had ever faced before. "We need more firepower," Miller muttered. "We need a concentrated strike." Thornton's mind raced. The Black Leviathan was surrounded by dozens of smaller enemy vessels, and breaking through that web of defenses would be nearly impossible. But then, an idea sparked, one that could tip the balance. The Vornath had been holding back their true power, using only a fraction of their firepower in the earlier stages of the battle. Now was the time for their trump card. "Contact the Vornath fleet," Thornton ordered. "Tell them we need everything they've got. No more holding back." Minutes stretched into an eternity as the Resolute maneuvered through the thick of battle. Thornton's heart pounded in his chest. The Black Leviathan was inching closer, its weapons charging up to fire a devastating beam capable of incinerating entire planets. He had no more time to waste. Then, finally, the response came. A massive surge of energy pulsed through the space around the Resolute, followed by the roar of the Vornath fleet unleashing their full arsenal. Hundreds of plasma cannons, antimatter missiles, and energy torpedoes streaked toward the Leviathan, their trajectories impossible to predict, their intensity overwhelming. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The Black Leviathan's shields crackled under the barrage, energy flashing as if the ship were screaming in pain. And then, with a deafening explosion that shook the very fabric of space, the Leviathan's shields failed. The Vornath's fire had pierced its defenses. "Yes," Miller shouted, her fist clenched in victory. But there was no time to celebrate. The Black Leviathan's core began to destabilize, its engines sputtering as it initiated a self-destruct sequence. It wouldn't be long before the entire fleet would be dragged into the maelstrom. "Pull back. Get the fleet out of range," Thornton barked. "We don't want to be caught in the blast." Human and allied ships scrambled, pulling away from the doomed capital ship. But as the Black Leviathan detonated, the shockwave rocked the battlefield. Ships on both sides were knocked off course, and for a moment, it seemed like the war might be lost in the debris. But the damage was done. The Black Armada, without its flagship, began to falter. Their lines broke, the ships scattered. The human fleet and their allies pushed forward, exploiting the gap. In the wake of the explosion, the galaxy was left with one undeniable truth. The Black Armada was not invincible. The tipping point had been reached. The Armada had underestimated humanity. And now, they were about to learn just how far they would go to protect their home and the galaxy. The explosion of the Black Leviathan sent ripples through the galaxy, its shockwave scattering debris across the Sol sector and shaking the very foundations of the Black Armada. The fight was far from over, but the death of their flagship was a blow that would not easily be recovered from. The enemy's formation began to unravel, their ships scattering in confusion, their once coordinated attacks losing cohesion. The combined fleets of the galaxy, led by humanity's unwavering resolve, pressed forward, cutting through the disarray like a sharpened blade. Thornton stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the holoscreen, watching the remnants of the Armada struggle to regroup. The human fleet, despite their losses, was alive. And now, for the first time since the war began, the Black Armada was on the back foot. "Target their command vessels," Thornton barked, his voice steely. "We cripple their leadership. We cripple their will to fight." Lieutenant Miller nodded, her eyes narrowed as she tracked the enemy ships. The human fleet, though fewer in number, was relentless in its pursuit. Every shot counted now. Every maneuver, every tactical decision, would decide the fate of billions. "We've got them on the run," Miller said, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "They're disorganized. It's time to finish this." But even as the human and allied fleets tightened their noose around the remaining Black Armada forces, Thornton's mind remained sharp. The Leviathan may have been destroyed, but the enemy was not beaten. There was something terrifying about their ability to adapt, to evolve in the face of defeat. He couldn't afford to make the mistake of underestimating them. Suddenly, an alarm blared across the bridge, the lights flickering as a wave of energy pulses shot through space. Thornton's heart skipped a beat. What the hell was that? The comms officer's voice was tinged with panic. "Sir, a massive energy surge. Something is emerging from the enemy's flagship remnants. It's enormous." Before Thornton could respond, the black void of space seemed to warp and bend as an immense ship, far larger than any they had seen before, appeared from the debris cloud. It was unlike anything in the Black Armada's fleet, a ship of such colossal proportions that it made the Leviathan look like a fighter in comparison. Its design was even more alien, a series of jagged edges and pulsating energy conduits running across its hull, as if it were a living, breathing entity rather than a machine. "Impossible," Thornton whispered, his voice barely audible. "They have another one." Miller's face was drawn with disbelief. It's a behemoth. No ship should be able to withstand that kind of scale." The ship, a vessel so enormous it seemed to swallow up the stars around it, took its place at the center of the remaining Black Armada's fleet. Its weapons powered up in unison, and a singular, haunting beam of light, brighter than any star, fired from the core of its hull. The blast tore through the front line of the Galactic fleet with terrifying precision, vaporizing entire ships in the blink of an eye. The Black Armada was not retreating. It was revealing its last, most deadly weapon. "They're not done yet," Thornton muttered, his knuckles white, as he gripped the command chair. "But neither are we." For a moment, the fleets of humanity and their allies hesitated. The scale of the new threat was staggering, its firepower overwhelming. The newly arrived Keshri and Wraithai ships, their shields already battered from the earlier conflict, struggled to form a cohesive counterattack. The Vornath fleet, though massive, looked uncertain. No one had anticipated this. Then came the message from Earth. Thornton's eyes flicked to the comms officer, who had just patched it through. It was General Jackson, back at headquarters, his face grim but determined. "We've got one shot at this, General Thornton." Jackson's voice echoed across the bridge. "The humans are ready. The entire fleet. We fight as one." Thornton nodded, a surge of pride welling up in his chest. Humanity had made its mark. And now, humanity would lead. "All ships, listen up." Thornton's voice boomed across the comms. "This is our fight. We take that monster down, or we die trying. Focus all fire on the core. We break it, we break them." The human fleet, alongside their allies, surged forward. The behemoth was a force of unimaginable power, but it wasn't invincible. Thornton had learned something crucial from this war. Strength wasn't just in firepower. It was in unity. The galaxy had come together as one, and humanity had become the heart of that resistance. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. In a bold, coordinated move, the human fleet led the charge, darting in with their agile ships, while the larger forces created a protective shell. The Vornath and Keshri moved in unison, their weapons synchronized in a final devastating volley. The Wraithai, ever precise, struck with surgical accuracy. The behemoth shuddered as its shields faltered, the first crack in its seemingly indestructible armor. Thornton's eyes locked onto the holoscreen as the final volley from the combined fleets hit its core. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Then, with a cataclysmic roar, the behemoth exploded, its power core collapsing in on itself, taking the rest of the Black Armada with it. In that final moment, the enemy's forces disintegrated, their once mighty fleet reduced to nothing but debris scattered across the cold expanse of space. The war was over. Humanity had not only survived, they had won. As the dust settled and the first rays of victory illuminated the battlefield, Thornton stood tall, knowing that the galaxy had just been reshaped. Humanity had proven itself, a force that could stand against anything, even the most impossible odds. The Black Armada was no more, and the galaxy would never forget the day humanity decided to stop being nice.